Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So Jeremy Corbyn left the conference hotel just a few minutes ago. There we can see him there. He was accompanied by 6 young people, Labour activists. The party, of course, has been inundated by new members since Mr Corbyn became leader, and many of them are young. Now he's going to get to his feet in about 20 minutes' time. We're expecting him to speak for less than half an hour. It's probably, if that's the case, it'll be the shortest party conference leader speech I will ever covered since Disraeli, or was it Gladstone? I forget when I started. He'll put the party on an election footing and outline 10 policy pledges that Labour would deliver in government. But Mr Corbyn's bigger task is to try to bring the party together after another divisive leadership contest. It dominated the summer. What, if anything, will his olive branch be to MPs? And if the snap election that Jeremy Corbyn warns could materialise, what kind of position will the party be in to take on the Tories? We'll look at the polling as it stands now. So we'll have Jeremy Corbyn's speech live and uninterrupted here on BBC Two in about 20 minutes' time. Joining me for the duration of this broadcast, journalist and commentator Rachel Shabby. Welcome back to the programme. What does Mr Corbyn, or what should Mr Corbyn do to reach out to those in the party, particularly the MPs that didn't want him as leader?
Well, there's a couple of things he can do. One, of course, is to focus on the policy areas over which they are united, and as it turns out, there are plenty of those. They all agree about having an anti-austerity programme, about going big on investment in public infrastructure, investment in housing, support for the welfare state, support for comprehensive schools. So there are a lot of areas over which they can agree. But you're right, people who walked away over the summer are going to need a path back. They're going to need something to allow them to be able to reverse that decision made over the summer. And I would imagine that Corbyn and his team are now in conversation with various people over exactly what can be made, what offers can be made to allow people to find a way back into the shadow cabinet.
Does he need to bring what we might call the rebels? Does he need to bring some of these prominent rebels back into the shadow cabinet?
I think it depends. I mean, when he formed his first shadow cabinet, when he was first elected as leader, it was very much a sort of unity cabinet. It spanned across all the diverse and varied factions of the Labour Party that have been one family for so long. That didn't really work out, and I think one of the reasons it didn't work out is that, you know, some members of the cabinet weren't that unified in their approach. There was sniping, there was briefing to the press that was seen as undermining of both the cohesion of the cabinet, the shadow cabinet, and of the leadership himself. So, you know, were he to reach out across the party in the same way again, there would need to be guarantees that that would stop, I think.
Mr Corbyn's people have blamed the bad polling, particularly this summer, because Labour's been diverted by another leadership contest, 2 in the space of 1 year. So does he need now, when this is all behind him and we move on, does he need now to be able to demonstrate that he can improve the party's opinion poll ratings?
Definitely. I mean, I think that the divisions in the party and the fact that people have been looking for months at a party in disarray are only part of the story in terms of the bad polling. Some of it is actually to do with his leadership, and I do think that, you know, he does need to address that. A lot of people that I've spoken to in the last few days. People have been previously very cynical about his capacity as leader, have said that they've seen a change, that they said that in the last few months especially he has raised his game. It's not perfect yet, it's a long way from that, but they are definitely saying that they see signs of improvement. So I think were he to continue along that same path and at the same time draw on all the wealth and the experience that all the factions of the Labour Party have to bring to the table, if they were behind him and enabling him with their talents, I think that would also make a big difference.
On the eve of the conference, Andy Burnham, who's now the outgoing Shadow Home Secretary because he's going to run for Mayor of London and favourite to win it, Mayor of Manchester, and I think London
Sadiq
already
Khan can relax.
has a Labour Mayor,
Yeah.
yes. Sadiq Khan just spilt his coffee there, I think. Andy Burnham kind of implied that there was a test, that they had to see an improvement because no one, I think these were his words, had the right to take Labour to a devastating defeat, which is what he was referring to 2020. In case that was is that realistic though now? I mean, is it realistic to think that if things don't get better, Labour would change its leader again?
I don't know, but I also think it's a very long game. I mean, the problems that the Labour Party has had in terms of its own electability go beyond Jeremy Corbyn. They have been hemorrhaging support among the wider population for some time. They have lost 2 elections. So
quite a low share of the vote, too.
Quite a low share of the vote. So the problems that they need to address, I think, go far beyond the leadership. They come down to finding a way to re-engage with the population, find a way to re-engage with people who have, for whatever reason, have become disillusioned with the Labour Party and whose votes they lost, and also a section of the population that just hasn't been interested in politics at all and doesn't vote. So I think one of the encouraging things about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership is that he has managed to start to speak to that section of the population.
Perhaps invigorate an interest in politics.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll be talking about all this and more. It's good to have you aboard this afternoon. This time last year, the Labour conference kicked off with the announcement of Jeremy Corbyn's election as party leader. This year's conference started in exactly the same fashion. But what about the intervening 12 months? Here's a reminder of how the year unfolded for the new Labour leader and his party.
Any chance we could start?
And so I sent out an email to thousands of people and asked them what questions they would like to put to the Prime Minister. Public opinion is moving increasingly against what I believe to be an ill-thought-out rush to war.
We must now confront this evil. It is now time for us to do our bit in Syria.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody.
You don't see this often. A politician resigning live on television.
I've just written to Jeremy Corbyn to resign from the front bench. I think that things that are being said, that are being briefed out, that I've seen being briefed out this morning, are simply not true.
You need help. You need help. You need help. Factually wrong. No, factually wrong. Racist remarks.
Do you accept that this has become something of a crisis?
It's not a crisis. There's no crisis.
We were getting predictions that Labour was going to lose councils. We didn't. We hung on.
Tonight at 10, tributes to the Labour MP Jo Cox, who's died after being stabbed and shot on a street in West Yorkshire.
She was an exemplary MP, a real servant of democracy in every way one could want or imagine.
British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe.
Jeremy Corbyn, 61.8%.
Memories of Mr Corbyn on the past 12 months. I'm joined now by the Shadow Education Secretary, Angela Rayner. Welcome back on the programme. You've had 2 leadership elections in 12 months. Can we take it for granted now that if the election's in 2020, Mr Corbyn leads the Labour Party into that election?
Well, I'm election fatigued in our party at the moment, Andrew, like most of our members are. I think we just want a bit of stability now. Yeah, we're all a bit tired now, so we want to unite.
Is it job done?
I hope so. I hope we pull together now and that we lead an opposition to what the Conservative government are doing at the moment. So I hope we do pull together, because you know what, that's what I think the nation are willing us to do, that because they want to see an opposition to the Conservative government, and we need to step up to the mark and be that opposition.
Now, at the moment, you're about 10, 12 points behind in the polls. Some of that, Mr Corbyn's people blame on the fact that you've been having your own leadership contest and looking inwards. But there's also boundary changes coming up, which will not be helpful for the Labour Party either. Although you want him to lead into the next election, does there come a time, if there's no improvement in Labour's position, or it even gets worse, that the leadership issue is opened again?
Well, I think Jeremy Corbyn needs to prove himself to the public. There's no question of that. You know, as I've always said, you know, respect is earned, it's not given. So we've got to do that. We've got, you know, we've got a task ahead of us. But I think the general public are willing us on. They want to see Labour be the opposition party that they know we could be, and a government in waiting. And we've got a long way to go to prove that. I'm hoping that now we've had this summer of discontent, we can unite together and move forward on that basis and give Jeremy that chance to lead our party with a big, strong team around him.
Well, given the task ahead of you, as you say, it is quite a formidable task, and the boundary changes do make it worse if they go through. And given the importance of immigration in the Brexit debate, and particularly among Northern Labour voters, many of whom did vote for Brexit, is it wise for your party and Mr Corbyn to take a leadership position on this that says he's not concerned about numbers, and he doesn't care about bringing down immigration numbers? Is that wise?
Well, many of my constituents talk to me about immigration and their concerns around it. And I think what's happened, Andrew, is that people, especially in the northern cities, like my area, for example, have felt that they've took a disproportionate effect on immigration, and they haven't seen the investment in their public services. They've seen undercutting of wages, and that we really need to deal with those issues first so that the general public can have some confidence that actually immigration has a really positive effect on all our communities and that we all do well from it.
But is it wise, was my question, to say that numbers are not the issue?
But Andrew, you know what? Not talking about it is not wise either, you know. That's what people are talking about on the doorstep. They want to hear Labour make those arguments because we know that immigration can be good for business, it's good for the UK. However, it has disproportionately affected some areas of the UK. We can't deny that. We've got to deal with that issue.
Let me try one more time. Is it wise, given all that you say, to say that numbers are not the issue?
Well, I think what Jeremy was trying to say about numbers is it's like pinning blancmange to a wall. You know, you say one number, then it moves. It disproportionately affects some areas. So, for example, you may not need the same number of Labour in my area, for example, as you may need in another area. So it's about making sure. I think the fundamental thing that governments have failed to do, and they've failed to really respond to and prepare for immigration and prepare for what the Labour workforce is and the housing and public service needs. And when you've cut in those areas as well, so this is the crucial bit, in areas like my area, the public sector is a large employer, you've cut it back so much as well, is that it's really had this pinchular effect on our communities, and that's where the tensions have come.
Should there be controls on the numbers?
I think you're getting into an arbitrary, argument now, Andrew. I think where there is a specific need for labour and you're looking at making sure that it's not undercutting British workers in terms of their wage bill, that we've got good housing in place, including council housing. It's not a dirty word.
But that's creating an environment for immigrants coming here and for those already here, which is positive.
Yeah.
What I said was, should there be controls on the numbers coming in?
But Andrew, we already have controls because we're an island. We already have that in place. So, but what's happened is
we have free movement from the EU at the moment. Once we leave the EU, should there be controls on EU migration?
If there's no housing and there's no infrastructure, then people can't move into a particular area. But what we've seen is a disproportionate effect on some areas, and that's why people have felt it so significantly. What we need to be looking at is where we've got skills gaps, where we need people to come into work. We should be welcoming that, but we have to crucially make sure that the infrastructure is in place.
Angela Rayner, thank you very much. Let's just take a look inside the hall, and as I do so, I welcome viewers on the BBC News Channel to this Daily Politics conference special, live from Liverpool, where in a few moments the leader of the Labour Party, the newly re-elected leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, will be giving his second keynote address as leader to the party faithful gathered in the hall, and of course to the wider public through channels like this, as he tries to reach beyond Labour and begin to attempt to gel with the wider electorate, because at the end that is what matters if you want power, not winning leadership elections but winning the elections in the country. And that will be a two-pronged job he has to do today. One will be to attempt to try and bring the Labour Party together after these divisions over the summer, but begin to build a case for why Labour should form the next government in 2020, should that be the time of the election. Not long to go now. We know a little bit of what he may say. Let's just go over some of that. I'm joined by the BBC's assistant political editor, Norman Smith. Norman, good to see you. Immigration is going to be the big issue in this speech, is it not? Because of what he's not saying.
Yeah, it's not going to be a big issue because of what he does say. It's what he doesn't say, and the build-up to this whole speech. He did want to raise the issue of immigration, so he wanted to flag up his ideas of bringing back the Migration Impact Fund, which, remember, Gordon Brown introduced. Actually, the Tories have also committed to have a similar sort of thing, although they've not implemented it.
So they abolished the first one in 2011.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was peanuts.
It was 50 million, I think.
They didn't reach that. Million. They only spent, I went through and looked at the figures, they spent 23 billion in 23 million. 23 billion might have made a difference. 23 million in 2009 and another 23 million in 2010, which I think you can see is nothing.
He's now talking about spending more than 50 million is what he's saying. But, you know, the issue is his overnight briefing from his spokesman, which was so... I mean, it was just there in black and white. Labour is not about reducing immigration. There's very little wriggle room or any ambiguity about that. It's pretty straightforward. And understandably, it's caused considerable alarm amongst many Labour MPs because they think it just sounds like he's really not listening to the electorate. It sounds like two fingers to people who voted for Brexit, to people representing northern seats. They say, hang on, we've got UKIP breathing down our neck. You cannot possibly say this sort of thing. And I mean, I think it kind of has made explicit what has been, you know, Jeremy Corbyn's implicit view for a long, long time. He basically is pretty relaxed about levels of immigration.
And there's John McDonnell too, isn't he?
I think it kind of reflects a sort of divide in Labour thinking between, if you like, metropolitan Labour and northern Labour. And, you know, in the big cities, there is genuinely, I think, a much more relaxed view. They take the view that immigration leads to a more diverse society, it leads to innovation, it leads to energy, it is a good thing. Very different story in some of the old industrial mill towns, where there aren't jobs, where there aren't businesses, and they are under real pressure. So that sort of candour on immigration, I think, has sort of exposed the real tensions over Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and whether it is too London-based.
Journalist Rachel Shabby is with us too, helping us get through this speech today. Is this a tactical mistake by Mr. Corbyn, or does it just follow from what he's always believed?
No, I really don't think it's a tactical mistake. I think it's long past time that the Labour Party started to talk about this. Look, the environment in which we discuss migration now has become so loaded and so difficult, and that was exacerbated by the way that we discussed Brexit, that is now very difficult for him to raise the issue that he's raising. That doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it very difficult. The truth of the matter is that even Theresa May and her Conservative government, they know that a cut on migration would be bad for the economy. We all know that. Every economist knows that. They cannot say it out loud because they know that it would not be popular to say it.
Any cut.
So what Jeremy Corbyn is trying to do instead is to shift the focus. He's saying, look, we understand there are concerns about wage undercutting, about job insecurity, about access to welfare, access to housing, not being able to see your doctor, sending your kid to a packed school. We understand those strains. Let's focus on what the cause of those strains is. It's economics, it's austerity cuts, it's cutting public services so that local authorities don't have the capacity to cope. And let's not blame migrants for that. Let's remove the economic causes for those concerns.
But to do all that, to build the housing, to improve the schools, to create the public services for a rising population, which is rising indigenously as well as rising for people coming in, don't you need a break until you get these things in place?
But that's the thing about it, is that we don't need a break. We need to maintain the levels of migration that we have.
330,000 net.
And most importantly of all in all of this is that even people who voted for Brexit and people who think that there is a problem with migration, the majority of those people polled would not be prepared to suffer financially as a trade-off for a reduction in migration. That is exactly what will happen.
Right.
So we need to be honest about saying that. And I think Jeremy Corbyn is starting to initiate that conversation. It's really difficult. It's going against the grain.
I understand.
But it is a far more honest
Let me bring
conversation.
Norman Smith back in. I mean, it would seem from the briefing that we got that there's almost no talk of any kind of controls on EU migration after we leave. But when I interviewed Barry Gardiner on the Daily Politics at lunchtime today, he said there would be all manner of quality controls on immigration. To be honest, I didn't understand what he was saying. Did you?
Well, I'm guessing, is he talking about some sort of points-based system? Is that what he means by quality controls, that people will be assessed in terms of whether they had, you know, the right work qualifications, whether they had, say, educational qualifications? I mean, I don't know.
But that's not the policy, is it?
No, it's not the policy. And Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, I think he's been pretty honest about this in interviews, that he doesn't really believe in controls on EU migration. He does actually believe in freedom of movement. His argument is that there are plenty of Brits living abroad. If we start imposing curbs, and there'll be curbs imposed on them. And more broadly, he thinks that we do need very large numbers of migrants because of the NHS, because of certain industries which rely on foreign labour, and because of the benefits they bring to the economy. So he is not in any way suggesting there should be any controls. In fact, I'm not sure he would support any controls at all. He certainly never articulated that when he's asked about it. I mean, more broadly, it just seems to me that this is just an issue which has dogged Labour almost for a decade now. I mean, it seems to be such a difficult conversation for Labour to have. I mean, you kind of go all the way back to, you know, Gordon Brown and Gillian Duffy, and then Ed Miliband and his last conference speech not mentioning immigration, and now this. And it seems to me Labour find it very hard to have this conversation about immigration. I mean, it's a really fraught issue for them. And I think the reason for that, if I'm honest, is that there is a Labour view that bluntly talking about numbers is borderline racist. And I think that is a view of some Labour people, and that makes it very hard to have this discussion, and they are still struggling to try and frame a debate which doesn't descend into a very, very politically charged one.
The Labour Party, particularly Mr Corbyn, has said that they need to be geared up for a quick election, that there could be one happening early next year. And that's a good thing if you want to promote unity. An election always concentrates the mind and try to get things. But it creates a problem for them too, because if they do think that, they're going to need to firm up on their policies and not just speak in slogans.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that hasn't happened yet.
Absolutely, no. I mean, Labour is travelling sort of slogan heavy and policy light, as far as I can see. We've had plenty of aspiration and ambition about full employment, an equal society, peace and justice, so on and so forth. In terms of nitty-gritty, well, how is this going to be achieved? Actually, we really don't have much insight. I mean, I think the general election plea warning is by and large a unity gambit, just to say to Labour MPs, for God's sake, let's not have all this, wrangling because we could be on the cusp of a general election. I'm not sure he actually believes that in a few months we could be plunged into another general election. I mean, Theresa May has pretty much signalled she does not want to go down that road. It's much harder than in previous years because of the Fixed-Term Parliament Act. It's no easy thing to engineer.
Parliament would have to vote for an election.
Indeed so. So I think it is part of Corbyn's attempt to try and hold this party together, at least in the short to medium term. Because, as you say, if we were to go into a general election now, you've got a party which has just been through the most acrimonious and difficult leadership contest with precious little detail in terms of policy, with a leader who, is still reviled by a significant part of his parliamentary party.
Reviled, that's an accurate enough word?
It's maybe overstating it, but I mean, there are certainly members of his parliamentary party who are never going to be reconciled to his leadership because, bluntly, they believe he's taking the Labour Party over a cliff.
The John McDonnell's speech, the Shadow Chancellor on Money, got a little bit overshadowed when there was then the argument about Clive Lewis and the changing in his speech on Trident. But at the centre of Labour's new economic policy is a massive increase in public investment, to be financed largely by borrowing on the public purse. For a party that lost 2 elections in a row because it was seen to be profligate with the public finances, how do you square that?
As with everything else when it comes to the Labour Party, there is a lot of work to do. There is a lot of narrative shift that needs to take place in terms of public perception. As you rightly point out, there is a perception that the Labour Party is not that good with money, basically. It can't be trusted with the economy. For some reason, that narrative has become true or been perceived as true, even though there is nothing to suggest that that is the case. On the other hand, what we're looking at the Labour Party now trying to combat with an economic policy, something that is a direct challenge to economics that have quite blatantly been seen to fail, not just with the economic crash, but with the fact that people are struggling, wages are stagnating, people who are working very, very hard end up just standing still, going slowly backwards. Their kids aren't able to get houses or jobs. They can't afford university tuition fees. Everything is stagnant, and people are waking up to the fact that an economic system is failing far too many people. So what the Labour Party is trying to do, and what this economic programme is about, is to try and reverse that, is to try and address it. And it's actually in line with fairly centrist leading economists who are now saying exactly the same thing. You've had too much austerity. Neoliberalism is failing. We need to invest. We need to invest in public infrastructure. We need to invest in housing. The government needs to borrow and invest in order to boost the economy. That isn't a radical idea. That has become a very centrist economic approach.
We expect to hear from Mr. Corbyn in about 20 past the hour. That is the Corbyn case for what's being to be done. But I look from the World Economic Forum today, Britain moved up to become the 7th most competitive economy in the world. And nearly all the countries that are still ahead of it, Singapore, Switzerland, the United States, Germany, none of them do what you've just said.
Yes, but Britain is doing great as an economic power, as you say, but it is doing really, really badly at sharing that economy around.
Record unemployment?
There is no need for food banks in a country that's one of the wealthiest in the world. There is no need for 1 in 3 children to be living below the poverty line. So it's not about the fact that Britain isn't a good economy. It is, but it's about finding a way to redistribute that and stop the rampant inequality that's caused so much hardship and so much pain for so many people.
Norman Smith, we hear, Rachel said it earlier in the programme, that on so many policies Labour is united. Trident's an obvious one that it's not, but on many other issues Labour is united. Is that true, though, in general, of the debt-financed public investment programme on the scale that Mr McDonnell and Mr Corbyn have been talking about? It's 250 billion, sometimes 500 billion, depending on the article or the speech that you read. Is there really unity on that?
Well, I think it is true to say that the deficit, which was like one of the defining issues in the run-up to the last election, seems to have gone AWOL. I mean, I've not heard anyone really talking about the deficit here. And if you think, you know, Ed Miliband got slaughtered at his last conference speech when, oops, a daisy, forgot to mention the deficit. I mean, I don't know whether John McDonnell mentioned it. Maybe he did, but I mean, it really has dropped off the political...
Just because George Osborne has stopped talking about it since Brexit as well. I mean, isn't that why nobody's talking about it?
Well,
not the Conservatives, not the Labour Party. It's stopped. It's no longer an issue, is it?
What has changed, though, I think, is the way in which Labour now seems to be racking up an awful lot of bills, which we've no real clear idea how they're going to be paid for. I mean, if you go through the policies we've had, if you take, I don't know, say an area like education, we've got, what, tuition fees are going to be scrapped, the maintenance grants are coming back, EMAs coming back. I mean, there's a whole load of spending commitments which we've no real clear idea how those are going to be paid for. And it just seems to me where we previously operated in a climate where everyone was having to think within the constraints of how much of a deficit did we have, that now has been chucked out of the window, and that really no longer forms part of the economic argument. And I was struck yesterday when, was it yesterday or the day before, Jeremy Corbyn, I think, was asked about this 500 billion figure. And someone said to him, where do you get that figure from? Did you just, I mean, is that just a nice round figure? And he kind of hummed and hawed. And you do kind of wonder if the 500 billion figure has just been plucked from nowhere without any solid analysis of where this cash is going to come from. And I do think there's been a total mind shift in Labour now, that they're no longer playing by the old rules of we've got to balance the books, we've got to be aware of the deficit, to really coming out with a load of pretty extensive spending pledges which we don't know how the
and
bill's
which
going
we
to be
will
paid
be drilling
for.
down on, as we will when the Tories come with their autumn statement. I suspect the autumn statement, although the deficit may not be up there as the most important economic indicator, which it was under Mr Osborne, Mr Hammond, I think, is not the kind of Chancellor that's going to forget about the deficit altogether. We were told that the speech would start at 2020. It's now 2032. We were told the speech would be 30 minutes. We're now told it's 50 minutes. He's probably been listening to this discussion and thought, I'll add in, I'm going to add in that point. I'll just add in a few more. What Rachel said, that's a very good point. Let me just add that in, or even that too. There we go. That carries on like this. We could be here to midnight on this. The next big, we've got the Tories next week, but the next big economic event for us will be the autumn statement on November the 23rd, and we will see then, will we not, as Rachel was saying, deficit not at the centre of the economic debate as it was, just what position it is now in under the May-Hammond government.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely true. Everything has changed with Brexit, and Theresa May too has pretty much said we don't have to worry about a surplus, I think, by 2020. Philip Hammond is going to have said they're going to have to make fiscal adjustments. I mean, the whole centre of gravity politically, let's be honest, has changed from deficit reduction to post-Brexit. That has changed everything, and the focus now is on what on earth will life be like outside the EU from the previous sort of objective, which was, can we claw our way back to balancing the books? That's now no longer what we're all about. That's a total game changer. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sure someone is going to have to start saying, OK, so the deficit is going up, what is going to be done? You can't put it off forever and a day. Somewhere along the line, we have to address it, even in a post-Brexit climate. It can't just be put off forever and a day.
I mean, the whole discussion that takes place with even the Conservatives saying we're not going to shoot for a surplus anymore, so we'll relax the fiscal conservatism. Mr. McDonnell saying we'll borrow 250, we may borrow 300, let's maybe think of 500. All of that is predicated on interest rates being low. And interest rates are low at the moment. They are at historic lows. You can buy, governments can get debt 10 years forward. This government, about 0.8% of a yield is very low. But this borrowing will be done in 2021. And we have no idea what interest rates will be by then. If they were high, it would scupper all this thinking.
To a certain extent. I mean, I think a lot of this is premised, it is interest rates, as you say, but it's also the idea that you do need to invest in order to generate income. It's not just that it's going to create jobs and therefore taxes and therefore an increased budget. It's that there's going to be more money circulating in the economy. I mean, this is nothing new. These are fairly sort of Keynesian-based, mixed economy. This is nothing new. This is fairly centrist stuff that we're talking about. It's just that the economic conversation has shifted so far to the right that maybe it sounds a bit odd, but it's actually fairly ordinary, regular stuff. But what you're talking about in terms of a post-Brexit economy, I mean, I think this is one of the key areas over which
Let me just interrupt you. We just heard the Hillsborough campaigner Sheila Coleman is now introducing the pre-speech video. We don't carry videos of any of the party conferences, so we'll leave the delegates to watch that, and then we expect Mr. Corbyn is going to begin his speech, and of course we'll straight into the hall for that. Sorry, Rachel, I interrupted you.
Oh no, it's okay. I was just going to say that the Brexit issue that you rightly raised is probably one of the best ways that you could focus the Labour government, wishful thinking, Labour Party right now, and especially if they do think that there's going to be a snap election looming. But, you know, the Conservatives are in disarray over Brexit. Is it going to be hard? Is it going to be soft? Single market, not single market? They seem really clueless. And I think...
I'm not sure what Labour's policy is either. Well, we could file maybe both of them under C for clueless.
Yeah, but that could be a unifying call for the Labour Party. That could be something over which they have much more in common than the Conservatives are unified over.
Brexit is in some ways a gift for Labour, it seems to me, because if you look at the Conservative Party, I mean, how many times have we been here again and again and again? Premierships have been undone by the iceberg of Europe. And it seems to me when Theresa May eventually has to come clean and put a deal on the table, she can get away with it for now saying, hey, I can't tell you, I'm not giving a running commentary. That's fine for now. But somewhere down the line, she's got to put down, this is what I'm suggesting. Yes. And at that moment, she has to be able to turn to her party and say, look at the deal I've got. And there will be hard Brexiteers who will say, is that it? So she has got a moment when she's got to meet her party and sell the deal to her party. Now, if Team Corbyn can get their act together, if they can bring the Labour Party together, that is an opportunity for them when they can pile in. But you have to say, you know, given the week that they've just had, the tensions, the difficulties, the divisions, the doubts over Mr. Corbyn, it's an awfully big ask to think they are going to be in that position to seize that moment.
We heard policy from Mr. McDonnell. A lot of it still to be fleshed out. We're going to hear, I think, some policy from Mr. Corbyn too, though from what I've seen, maybe it's just still in quite headline terms. But is there not a danger that for Labour still that there's a battle still going on in the NEC? There could be a battle for the permanent bureaucracy, including the regional leaders, and boundary changes create an automatic selection process for MPs.
I mean, the one thing that struck me about this week is here we had on, what was it, Saturday, Jeremy Corbyn winning a thumping great majority. But, you know, the battle for the soul of the Labour Party is still raging. It is very far from over, and the moderates, the centrists, call them what you will, they have not vanished over the horizon. No. They are, I think, gradually getting their act together.
You don't think they're in retreat?
Well, I think they took a step back. Of course they did. They lost the leadership election. They tried everything to stop Jeremy Corbyn. They tried rule changes. They tried to keep him off the ballot paper. They tried to stampede him into resigning with the resignations. But in a way, I think they have now grasped the gravity of their plight. I think they are beginning to get organised. Tom Watson's speech yesterday was interesting with the pretty direct criticism of Jeremy Corbyn, likewise with Sadiq Khan. They won the tussle over the NEC. I think they go away with this, not with their tail between their legs. Yes, they've been battered, but I think the feeling they take away from this is we've got to do what Team Corbyn does. We have got to organise, and they are now talking a bit momentum light about setting up groups around the country to try and support MPs who are under pressure. So game on. It's not all, it's not all going Jeremy Corbyn's way. There are, significant forces trying to claw back ground. So I think the sort of battle for the future direction of the Labour Party is very far from over.
Do you think we will, Rachel Shabby, see some bloody battles on the reselection, deselection front in certain constituencies?
No, I think that has been really exaggerated. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is. I mean, he's quite specifically said we're not talking about deselection. I understand that some local MPs might feel nervous about that, but I do think there's a bigger picture here, which is, I mean, it's a bit like running an organisation where there has been a culture change, and some people don't like the change and will moan about the change.
And some of the top don't represent that change.
The idea is to bring people with you. That's good leadership, isn't it? It's bringing people with you in the change. But if they continue to resist it, then what do you do with that?
Well, maybe we'll find out in a minute. Let's go straight into the hall now. The video's finished, and I think Mr. Corbyn is just about to be introduced. The delegates are getting to their feet. And there is Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, a man who's won 2 leadership elections in the space of 12 months, taking the applause of the delegates. It looks like he's going to speak for about 50 minutes, so that should take us almost to 4:30, maybe just a little, sorry, 3:30, maybe just a little less than that, and we will analyse what he had to say afterwards. But we are going to bring you, as we always do, the leader's speech at all the major party conferences, live and uninterrupted. So let's now tip into the hall as Mr. Corbyn takes the applause and begins his address to the party faithful and to the wider electorate beyond. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that welcome and that introduction. This hall is absolutely packed here today in Liverpool, and we've even got an overspill down the road. I want to say thank you to everyone that's here today. I want also, before I go into my speech, to say a huge thank you to all the staff of this conference centre that have made us so welcome and worked so hard here today. I want to say thank you to all of our Labour Party staff for all the huge work they've put in for this conference today and all the other days. And I want to say a big thank you to my own staff in my own office in the constituency and in Parliament for the huge work and support they give me and give our party all the year round. But I've got to slightly correct myself because I did say the hall is completely packed. Well, I got a message on the way in from Virgin Trains. They have assured me there are 800 empty seats in the hall. Either way, conference, it's a huge pleasure to be holding our party's annual conference at this fantastic city. The city of Liverpool that shaped our country, our economy, our culture and our music. Liverpool has always been central to the Labour Party and our movement. And I know some people say campaigns and protests don't change things. But the Hillsborough families have shown just how wrong that is. It's taken 27 years but those families have shown with great courage and dignity, finally, that you can get truth and justice for the 96 who died. I want to pay tribute to all of the families and campaigners for their solidarity, their commitment and their love. Thank you. And as Andy Burnham put it to conference this morning, we must learn from them. And we promise those campaigning for justice for Orgreave, for Shrewsbury, for the thousands of workers blacklisted for being trade unionists, we will support your battles for truth and justice, and when we return to government, we will make sure you have both. Because winning justice for all and changing society for the benefit of all is the heart of what Labour is about. So yes, our party is about campaigning, and it's about protest too. But most of all, it's about winning power in local and national government to deliver the real change our country so desperately needs. That's why the central task of the whole Labour Party, must be to rebuild trust and support to win the next general election. And form the next government. That is the government I'm determined to lead to win power to change for Britain for the benefit of working people. But every one of us in this hall today knows that we will only get there if we work together. And I think it's fair to say, after what we've been through these past few months, it hasn't always been exactly the case. Those months have been a testing time for the whole party. First, the horrific murder of Joe Cox, followed by the shock of the referendum results, and then the tipping over of divisions in Parliament into the leadership contest that ended last Saturday. Joe's killing was a hate-filled attack on democracy that shocked the whole country. Joe Cox didn't just believe in loving her neighbour. She believed in loving her neighbour's neighbour, and that every life counted. And as Joe said in her maiden speech as an MP, we have far more in common with each other than things that divide us. Let that essential truth guide us as we come together again to challenge this Tory government and its shaky grip on power. In Joe's memory, thanks for everything she did, and thanks to her family and all her close friends for all they've been through and the solidarity they've shown together, so we may all learn from her life. We've also lost good MPs like Michael Meacher and Harry Harpham, both good friends of mine. They were Labour through and through, passionate campaigners for a better world. But let me also pay a particular tribute to those parliamentary colleagues who stepped forward in the summer to fill the gaps in the shadow cabinet. and ensure that Labour could function as an effective opposition in Parliament. They actually didn't seek office, but they stepped up when their party, and in fact the country, needed them to serve. They all deserve the respect and gratitude of our party and movement, and this conference should thank them today. They are our future. We've just had our second leadership election within a year. it had its fraught moments, of course, not only for Owen Smith and me, and I hope we don't make a habit of it. But there have also been some upsides to it. Over 150,000 new members have joined our party. Young rising stars have shone on the front bench, and we found that the party is more united on policy than we would ever have guessed. I'm honoured, deeply honoured, to have been re-elected by our party a second time with an even bigger mandate. But we all have lessons to learn and a responsibility to do things better and to work together more effectively. I will lead in learning those lessons. And I'd like to thank Owen too for the campaign and for his work as Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. And also, of course, to the Labour Party staff, our own teams, and the brilliant teams that support all of our members of Parliament and our party around the country. One lesson is that there is a responsibility on all of us to take care with our rhetoric. Respect democratic decisions, respect our differences, and respect each other. We know that robust debate has at times spilled over into abuse and hate around our country, including misogyny and anti-Semitism, especially on social media. Let me make it clear, that is utterly unacceptable. Our party must be a safe and welcoming space for everybody. We will continue to take firm action against abuse and intimidation. And let me be absolutely clear, anti-Semitism is an evil. It led to the worst crimes of the 20th century. Every one of us has a responsibility to ensure that it is never allowed to fester in our society again. This party always has and always will fight against prejudice and hatred of Jewish people with every breath in our body. We meet this year as the largest political party in Western Europe, with over 500,000 members, campaigning in every community in Britain. More people have joined our party in the last 20 months than in the previous 20 years. We have more of our fellow citizens in our party than all the other political parties in Britain put together. Some may see this as a threat, but I see it as a vast democratic resource. Our hugely increased membership is part of a movement that can take Labour's message into every community and win support for the election of a Labour government. Each and every one of these new members is welcome in our party. And after a 10-year absence, we welcome back the Fire Brigades Union into our party and to our conference. We are reuniting the Labour family, but I want to also, if I may, to say thank you to all of the firefighters and indeed all of the public sector workers who worked so hard to save people during the floods last winter. Thank you for everything you did. And over the past year, we've shown what Labour can do when the party stands together. At conference a year ago, I launched our campaign against cuts to tax credits, and we succeeded in knocking this government back. This year, 3 million families are over £1,000 better off because Labour stood together. In the budget, the government tried to take away billions from disabled people, but we defeated them on that. And we won all 4 parliamentary by-elections, and I welcome our new colleagues into Parliament and the great victories they achieved. In the May elections, we overtook the Tories to become the largest party nationally. We won back London with a massive win for Sadiq Khan, the first Muslim mayor of a Western capital city. My congratulations, Sadiq, for that incredible win. And we won the Bristol mayor for the first time, Marvin Rees, the first black mayor of any European city. My congratulations to Marvin. And we also won the mayoralty in Salford and, of course, right here in Liverpool. Congratulations. That's the road of advance we have to return to if we're going to challenge the Tories for power and turn the huge growth in the Labour Party into electoral support we need right across Britain. There is no doubt that my election as Labour leader a year ago and re-election this month grew out of a thirst for a new kind of politics and a conviction that the old way of running the economy in the country isn't delivering for more and more people. It's not, I promise you, about me, of course, or unique to Britain, but across Europe and North America and elsewhere, people are fed up with a so-called free market system that has produced grotesque inequality, stagnating living standards, and many calamitous foreign wars without end, and a political stitch-up which leaves the vast majority of people shut out of power. Since the crash of 2008, the demand for an alternative and an end to counterproductive austerity has led to the rise of new movements and parties in one country after another. But in Britain, it's happened in a different way, in the heart of traditional politics, in the Labour Party, which is something that we should be extremely proud of. It's exactly what Labour was founded for, to be the voice of the many, of social justice and progressive change from the bottom up. But it also means it's no good harking back to the tired old economic and political fixes of 20 and 30 years ago, because they won't work anymore. The old model is broken. We're in a new era that demands a politics and economics that meets the needs of our own time. Actually, even Theresa May gets it, sort of, that people want change. That's why she stood on the steps of Downing Street and talked about the inequalities and burning injustice in today's Britain. Well, she said it. In fact, she promised a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us. But even if she manages to talk the talk, there are problems about walking the walk. This isn't a new government. It's David Cameron's government repackaged with progressive slogans, but with a new, harsh, right-wing edge, taking the country backwards and dithering before the historic challenges of Brexit. Who seriously believes that the Tories could ever stand up to the privileged few? They are the party of the privileged few. Funded by the privileged few, for the benefit of the privileged few. Theirs is a party, after all, that now wants to force through an undemocratic boundary review based on an out-of-date version of the electoral register with nearly 2 million voters missing. They've dressed it up as a bid to cut the cost of politics by abolishing 50 constituencies, but the 12 million savings are dwarfed by the expense of the 260 peers David Cameron appointed at a cost of £34 million a year. It's nothing more than a cynical attempt to gerrymander the next election. And this is from a Prime Minister who was elevated to a job without a single vote being cast after a pantomime farce which saw one leading Tory after another falling on their swords. When I meet Theresa May across the dispatch box, I know that only one of us has been elected to the office they hold by the votes of 1/3 people. In any case, the Tories are simply incapable of responding to the breakdown of the old economic model, because that failed model is absolutely in their political DNA. It's what they deliver every time they're in government. Tory governments deregulate, they outsource, privatise, and they stand by as inequality grows. They've cut taxes for the privileged few, sold off our national assets to them, always on the cheap, and turned a blind eye to their chronic tax avoidance. They're so committed to the interests of the very richest, they've recruited Sir Philip Green into government as something called an efficiency czar. I'm not quite sure what an efficiency czar does, but I would simply say this: well, government might be a bit more efficient if the super rich like Sir Philip actually paid their taxes. When government steps back, there are consequences for every one of us. Look what's happened to housing under the Tories. House building has fallen to the lowest level since the 1920s, nearly a century ago. Home ownership is falling as more people are priced out of the market. Evictions and, disgracefully, homelessness and rough sleeping go up month after month, year after year. Council homes are being sold off without being replaced. And another consequence of that is that we, all of us, are paying over £9 billion a year to private landlords in housing benefit to pay the rent. Instead of spending public money on building council housing, we're subsidising private landlords. That's wasteful, inefficient, and frankly, poor government. So Labour will, as Theresa Pearce said, build over 1 million new homes, at least half of them council homes. And we will control private rents so we can give every British family that basic human right, a decent home. It's the same in the jobs market. Without proper employment regulation, there's been an explosion of temporary, insecure jobs. Nearly 1 million people on zero-hours contracts, not knowing what their earnings are going to be. There are now 6 million working people earning less than the living wage, and the poverty amongst those in work is at record levels. That didn't happen by accident. The Tories have torn up employment rights and deliberately tried to weaken the organisations that get people justice at work, the trade unions. Of course, trade unions are not taking this lying down. Look at the great campaign Unite has waged at Sport Direct to get justice for exploited workers. And hold Mike Ashley to account. That is why Labour will repeal the Trade Union Act and set unions free to do their jobs, defending and supporting their members and rights at work. And we will raise the minimum wage to a real living wage that brings working people out of poverty and will ban zero-hours contracts. As John McDonnell, our Shadow Chancellor, and Ian Lavery set this out very clearly at conference this week. And then there's the scandal of the privatised railways. More public subsidy than under the days of British Rail. All going to private firms, and more delays, more cancellations, and on top of that, the highest fares in Europe. That's why the great majority of British people back Labour's plan, set out so well by Andy McDonnell this week, to take the railways back into public ownership. But if you want the most spectacular example of what happens when government steps back, the global banking crash is an object lesson. A deregulated industry of out-of-control greed and speculation that crashed economies across the globe and required the biggest ever government intervention and public bailout in history. Millions of ordinary families paid the price of that failure. I pledge that Labour will never let a few reckless bankers wreck our economy again. So Labour is offering solutions. During this summer's leadership campaign, I set out 10 pledges which I believe can be the platform of our party's programme at the next election. They were put to conference yesterday in an NEC statement. They lay out the scope of the change we need to see for full employment, a homes guarantee, security at work, a strong public national health service and social care, a national education service for all, action on climate change, public ownership and control of our services, a cut in inequality of income and wealth, action to secure an equal society, and peace and justice at the heart of our foreign policy. Don't worry, conference, they're not the 10 commandments. I haven't come down from the mountain with them. They are here already, and they will now, of course, go to the National Policy Forum, and the whole party needs to build on them. All our brilliant members have ideas, imagination, inspiration. We want to hear them. We want them to help in refining those policies. And above all, take them out to the people of this country. Take them out so that we get support on them. But those 10 pledges, the core of the platform which I was re-elected, will now form the framework of what Labour will campaign for and for what a Labour government will do. Together, they show the direction of change we are determined to take and outline a programme to rebuild and transform Britain. They are rooted in traditional Labour values and objectives, but they are shaped to meet the challenges of the 21st century. They are values Labour is united on. They reflect the views and aspirations of the majority of our people, and they are values our country can and will support as soon as they are given the chance to do it. These pledges are not just words. Already across the country, Labour councils are putting Labour values into action in a way that makes a real difference to millions of people, despite cynical government funding cuts. that have hit Labour councils, often representing the poorest parts of the country, 5 times as hard as Tory-run areas. Good examples like Nottingham City Council setting up the not-for-profit Robin Hood Energy Company to provide affordable energy. Or Cardiff Bus Company taking 100,000 passengers every day, publicly owned, with a passenger panel to hold its directors to account. Or Preston Council working to favour local procurement and keep money in the town. Or Newcastle Council providing free Wi-Fi in 69 public buildings across the city. Or Croydon Council, which has set up a company to build 1,000 new homes. And as Councillor Alison Butler said, we can no longer afford to sit back and let the market take its course. Or Glasgow, that has established high-quality and flexible workplaces for start-up, high-growth companies in dynamic new sectors. Or, right here in Liverpool, set to be at the global forefront of a new wave of technology, the home to Sensor City, a £15 million business hub that aims to create 300 start-up businesses and 1,000 jobs over the next decade. And there are many other examples. It's a proud Labour record. Each and every Labour councillor deserves our heartfelt thanks for the work they do and the difficulties they endure in doing it. But I want to go further, because we want local government to go further and put public enterprise back into the heart of our economy and services to meet the needs of local communities. Municipal socialism for the 21st century as an engine of local growth and development. That's why I'm announcing that Labour will remove the artificial borrowing cap and allow councils to borrow against their housing stock. That single measure alone would allow them to build an extra 12,000 council homes a year. Labour councils increasingly have a policy of an in-house as the preferred provider, and many councils have brought bin collections, cleaners and IT services back in-house, insourcing privatised contracts to save money for council taxpayers and ensure good terms and conditions for their staff. I have said that Labour will put security at work and employment and union rights from day one centre stage. But 1 in 6 workers in Britain are now self-employed. They're right to value their independence, but for too many it comes with insecurity and a woeful lack of rights. So we will review arrangements for self-employed people, including social security that self-employed people pay for in their taxes, yet aren't fully covered by it. We will ensure that successful innovators have access to the finance necessary to take their ideas to the next level, grow their businesses and generate employment. So as part of our Workplace 2020 review, we will make sure that our tax and social security arrangements are fit for the 21st century, consulting with self-employed workers and the Federation of Small Businesses. If the Tories are the party of cuts and short-termism, Labour is the party of investing for the future. With the same level of investment as other major economies, we could be so much more, unlock so much skill, ingenuity and wealth. That's why we'll establish a national investment bank at the heart of our plan to rebuild and transform this country. And we will borrow to invest at historically low interest rates to generate far greater returns. It would be foolish not to, because that investment is expanding the economy and the income it generates for us all in the process. Even this government, after years of austerity and savage cuts, is starting to change its tune. I'm not content with accepting second-class broadband. Not content with creaking railways, not content with seeing the United States and Germany investing in cutting-edge and green technologies while we lag behind. Last year, for example, the Prime Minister promised a universal service obligation for 10 megabyte broadband. But since then, the government has done nothing, letting down entrepreneurs, businesses and families, especially those in rural areas that want to grow their economy. That's why we've set out proposals for a national investment bank with 500 billion of investment to bring our broadband, our railways, our housing and our energy infrastructure up to scratch. A country that doesn't invest is a country that has given up, that has taken the path of managed decline. A Labour government will never accept second best for this country. Our country's history is based on individual ingenuity and collective endeavour. We're the country of Ada Lovelace, Alan Turing, Tim Berners-Lee, Isambard Kingdom-Brunel, Sarah Guppy, George Stephenson, Eric Laithwaite, brilliant people that made so much and developed so much. But the Tories have turned their back on this proud British tradition. They've put privatisation and cutting spending first. Britain now spends less on research as a share of national income than France, Germany, the US and China. A Labour government will bring research and development up to 3% of GDP. Yesterday, Rebecca Long-Bailey set out the terms of our industrial strategy review. We need an economy that works for every part of this country, so that no community is left behind. And today, I'm asking everyone, businesses, academics, workers, trade unions, and anyone who cares about our future prosperity, to have a say in that review. We're a wealthy country, and not just in terms of money. We're rich in talent, rich in potential. That's why we've proposed a comprehensive national education service at the heart of our programme for government to deliver high-quality education for all throughout our lives. Education has always been a core Labour value. From the time of Ellen Wilkinson, the MP for Jarrow and later Education Minister, and before that. And a national education service will be an essential part of the 21st century welfare state. In a rapidly changing economy, people need to retrain or upgrade their skills without falling into debt. Britain already lags behind others in productivity. Partly, that's about investing in technology and infrastructure. And partly, it's about investing in people and their skills. How can we build and expand the sectors of the future without a skilled workforce? But this Conservative government has slashed adult education budgets, taking away opportunities for people to develop their skills and leaving businesses struggling to find the skilled workforce they need to succeed. So today, I'm offering business a new settlement. A new deal to rebuild Britain. Under Labour, we will provide the investment to rebuild Britain's infrastructure. We will fund that investment because it will lead to a more productive economy, providing the basis on which our economy and our businesses can thrive, helping to provide over 1 million good jobs and opportunities for businesses. But investment in capital must include investment in human capital. The skilled workers needed to make our economy a success. So this is the deal Labour will offer to business. To help pay for a national education service, we'll ask you to pay a little more in tax. We've already started to set out some of this, pledging to raise corporation tax by less than 1.5% to give an education maintenance allowance to college students, grants to university students, so that every young learner can afford to support themselves as they develop skills and get qualifications. Business shares in economic success, and it must contribute to it too. And I recognise that good businesses deserve a level playing field. So I also pledge to good businesses that we will clamp down on those that dodge their taxes. You should not be undercut by those that don't play by the rules. There is nothing more unpatriotic than not paying your taxes. Frankly, it's an act of vandalism, damaging our National Health Service, damaging older people's social care, damaging younger people's education. So a Labour government will make the shabby tax avoidance a thing of the past. Our National Education Service is going to be every bit as vital as our National Health Service has become. And we recognise that education isn't simply about preparing for the workplace. It's also about exploration of knowledge and unlocking the creativity that's there in every human being. So all school pupils should have the chance to learn an instrument, take part in drama and dance, have regular access to a theatre, gallery, museum in their local area. So that's why we will introduce an arts pupil premium to every primary school in England and Wales and consult on the design and national rollout to extend this pupil premium to all secondary schools. This will be a 160 million boost to schools to invest in projects that will support cultural activities for schools over the longer term. It could hardly be more different from the Tory approach to education. Their only plan is the return of grammar schools, segregation and second-class schooling for the majority. And what a great job Angela Rayner is doing in opposing them in this. So this Saturday, 1st of October, I want you to take this message into your community, that Labour is standing up for education for all. Grammar schools are not the only way the Tories are bringing division back into our society. They're also using the tried and tested tricks of demonising and scapegoating to distract from their failures. Whether it's single mothers, unemployed people, disabled people or migrants, Tory failure is always someone else's fault. And those smears have consequences, from children being bullied in school to attacks on the street, such as the rise in disability hate crime. I'm so proud of this party. In the last year, we stood up to the government on cuts to disabled people's benefits and cuts to working families' tax credits. And on Monday, our Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Debbie Abrahams, announced we would be scrapping the punitive sanctions regime and the degrading work capability assessment. As politicians, as political activists, as citizens, we have zero tolerance towards those who whip up hate and division. Stand together against racism, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and defend those being demonised. It's been shaming to our multicultural society that assaults on migrants have increased sharply since the referendum campaign, a campaign that peddled myths and whipped up division. It isn't migrants that drive down wages, it's exploitative employers and the politicians who deregulate the labour market and rip up trade union rights. It isn't migrants who put a strain on our National Health Service. It only keeps going because of the migrant nurses and doctors who come here, filling the gaps left by politicians who failed to invest in training. It isn't migrants that have caused a housing crisis. It's a Tory government that's failed to build homes. Immigration can certainly put extra pressure on services. That's why, under Gordon Brown, Labour set up the Migrant Impact Fund to provide extra funding to communities that have the largest rises in populations. Good plan. Very effective. What did the Tories do? They abolished it. Then they demonise the migrants for putting pressure on services. A Labour government will not offer false promises on immigration, as the Tories have done. We will not sow division by fanning the flames of fear. We will tackle the real issues of immigration instead, whatever the eventual outcome of Brexit negotiations, and make the changes that are needed. We will act decisively to end the undercutting of workers' pay and conditions through the exploitation of migrant labour and agency working, which would reduce the number of migrant workers in the process. And we will ease the pressure on hard-pressed public services that are struggling to absorb Tory austerity cuts in communities absorbing new populations. Labour will reinstate the Migrant Impact Fund and give extra support to areas of high migration, using the visa levy for its intended purpose. And we'll add a citizenship application fee levy to boost the fund. That is the Labour way to tackle social tension, investment and assistance, not racism and division. This party campaigned hard to remain in the European Union, and I spoke at rallies from Cornwall to Aberdeen for our Labour campaign to remain and reform. But although most Labour voters backed us, we did not convince millions of natural Labour voters, especially in those parts of the country left behind. Left behind by years of neglect, underinvestment and deindustrialisation. Now we have to face the future together. We are not helped by patronising or lecturing those in our communities who voted to leave. We have to hear their concerns about jobs, public services, wages, immigration, a future for their children. And we have to respect their votes and the decision of the British people. Of course, that does not mean giving a blank cheque to Theresa May and her three-legged team of fractious Brexiteers as they work up a negotiating plan, but it's unfortunately they have a distraction from that because they have to squabble about whose turn it is to go to Chevening country retreat each weekend. We've made it clear that we will resist a Brexit at the expense of workers' rights and social justice. We've set out our red lines on employment, environmental and social protection, and on access to the European market. But we will also be pressing our own Brexit agenda, including the freedom to intervene in our own industries like steel, without the obligation to liberalise or privatise public services. And building a new relationship with Europe based on cooperation and internationalism. And as Europe faces the impact of a refugee crisis fueled by wars across the Middle East, we have to face the role that repeated military interventions by British and other governments have played in that crisis. The Chilcot The Chilcot report made absolutely clear the lessons to be learned from the disastrous invasion and occupation of Iraq. Just as this month the Foreign Affairs Select Committee report into the war in Libya demonstrated, those lessons have still to be learned a decade. The consequences of those wars have been a spread of terrorism and violence across an arc of conflict that has displaced millions of people, forcing them from their countries. That's why I believe it was right to apologise on behalf of the party for the Iraq war. Right to say that we learned the lessons. And right to say that such a catastrophe must never be allowed to happen again. We need a foreign policy based on peace, justice and human rights. And I tell you this today, what great news it is to hear the peace treaty that's been agreed in Colombia after 50 years of devastating war. And we need to honour our international treaty obligations on nuclear disarmament as much as we do on human rights and other things, and encourage others to do the same. But we're a long way from that humanitarian vision. Britain continues to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, a country the United Nations says is committing repeated violations of international humanitarian law, war crimes in Yemen. And on Sunday, it was good to stand alongside the Yemeni community here in Liverpool, who endorsed our call to end those arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Just as the war crimes that are going on in other places, such as Syria, there has to be a political solution to the conflicts. So today, I make it clear that under a Labour government, when there are credible reports of human rights abuses or war crimes being committed, British arms sales will be suspended, starting with Saudi Arabia. Last year, the votes we needed to win power went many different ways in all parts of our country, while millions of our potential voters stayed at home. Many didn't believe that we offered an alternative that they wanted. It's true, there is an electoral mountain to climb. But if we focus everything on the needs and aspirations of middle and lower income voters, of ordinary families, if we demonstrate we've got a viable alternative to the government's failed economic policies, I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, we can build the electoral support that can beat the Tories. This means being the voice of women, of young people and pensioners, middle and lower income workers, the unemployed, the self-employed, minority communities, and those struggling with the impact of migration at work, and everyone struggling to get on and secure a better life for themselves, their families and their communities. Running like a golden thread through Labour's vision for today, as throughout our history, is the struggle for equality. Rampant inequality has become the great scandal of our time, sapping the potential of our society, tearing at its fabric. Labour's goal isn't just greater equality of wealth and income, it's also about power. Our aim could not be more ambitious. We want a new settlement for the 21st century, in politics, in business, our communities, with the environment and in our relations with the rest of the world. Every one of us in the Labour Party is motivated by the gap of what our country is and what it could be. We know that in the 6th largest economy in the world, the food banks, stunted life chances and growing poverty alongside wealth on an undreamt of scale are a mark of a shameful and totally unnecessary failure. We know how great this country could be for all its people with a new political and economic settlement, with new forms of democratic public ownership driven by investment in the technology and industries of the future, with decent jobs, education and housing for all, with local services run by and for people, not outsourced to faceless corporations. This is not backward-looking, this is very much the opposite. It's the socialism of the 21st century. Our job is now to win over the unconvinced of our vision. Only that way can we secure the Labour government we need. And let's be frank, no one will be convinced of a vision promoted by a divided party. We all agree on that. So I ask each and every one of you to accept the decision of the members, end the trench warfare and work together to take on the Tories. Conference, anything else is a luxury that the millions of people who depend on Labour cannot afford. We know there'll be local elections next May. In Scotland, where we won 3 council by-elections this summer. In Wales, thank you Labour Scotland. And in Wales and across the counties in England. And there'll be Metro Mayor elections too, including right here on Merseyside, where my good friend Steve Rotherham will be standing as Labour's candidate. Steve, best of luck. I'll miss your comradeship, your humour, your criticism, and your wonderful support. And on the same day, we're going to be electing Andy Burnham in Manchester and Sean Simon in Birmingham. Three big Labour victories on the same day. Are we agreed on that? But, there's always a but, isn't there? We could also face a general election next year. Whatever the Prime Minister says about snap elections, there is every chance that Theresa May will cut and run for an early election. So today we put ourselves on notice. Labour is preparing for a general election in 2017. And we hope and expect all our members to support our campaign. We will be ready for the challenge whenever it comes. Let's do it. Let's do it and be ready for that challenge. Let's do it in the spirit of the great Scots-born Liverpool football manager, Bill Shankly. Sorry, Andy, I know Andy's an Everton supporter, but don't go, don't leave. Stay. You're going to like it, Andy, it's okay. The socialism I believe in is everybody working for the same goal and everybody having a share in the rewards. That's how I see football, and that's how I see life. We're not all Bill Shankleys. Each of us comes to our socialism from our own experiences. Mine was shaped by my mum and dad, a teacher and an engineer, both very committed socialists and peace campaigners. My mum's inspiration was to encourage girls to believe they could achieve anything in their lives. And I've met some of the pupils she taught. She inspired so many girls to take up science and engineering because of her example. And in my experience, working as a volunteer teacher in Jamaica when I was a young man taught me so much about the strength of communities, living in adversity and showing the most amazing solidarity to each other in poverty and in remote communities, and determined to achieve something collectively good for their entire community. And later, I spent years as a union organiser in the National Union of Public Employees, representing low-paid workers, fighting for the national minimum wage, fighting for decent wages and conditions. Unions make us strong, but also it's the determination of people to be strong for themselves and, above all, strong for each other that shapes my politics, shapes my ideas, and shapes my values. As the great American poet Langston Hughes put it, I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Everyone here and every one of our hundreds of thousands of members has something to contribute to our cause. That's why we will unite. Build on our policies, take our vision out to a country crying out for change. We are 500,000 of us, and there will be many more, working together to make our country the place it could be. Conference, united, we can shape the future and build a fairer Britain in a peaceful world. Thank you.
And Jeremy Corbyn getting applauded as they all rise to his feet as he comes to an end. He didn't speak for 30 minutes, as we were told. He didn't speak for 40 minutes, as we were then told. He spoke for an hour. And he's getting a standing ovation as he waves back to the crowd, promising what he called a socialism of the 21st century. He began by saying that the new shadow cabinet members that had come in when so many of the older ones had resigned, they are the future, he said. He wanted progressive change from the bottom up. He said the Tories were merely the party of the privileged few. He saw his leadership of the Labour Party and those like-minded around him as part of a trend of the radical left in Europe, like Syriza in Greece and Podemos in Spain. On some policy details, which were high in aspiration, if low on actual detail, he wanted 500,000 more council houses, the renationalising of the railways. He said his 10-point programme that he had fought the party leadership battle on would become the basis of party policy for the next election. And that included the repeal of the Trade Union Act, which of course was the Conservative reforms, which the last Labour government made very few changes to. He offered a new deal for business. There would be multi-billion-pound public investment in infrastructure, but he was going to raise their corporation tax, the tax on their profits, to pay for various educational measures. He promised a national educational service. On migration, He concentrated on tackling the consequences of immigration, of extra support for areas of high immigration. There was nothing, as had been briefed before, that was accurate about numbers or what controls there would be in place. He did say there was an electoral mountain to climb, but if they could capture the support of middle and lower income voters, then they would climb that mountain. Norman Smith, BBC's political editor, is with me here. Norman, what did you make of that?
I thought, if I'm blunt, it was a bit of a missed opportunity in a funny sort of way, because, I mean, at the end of these sort of speeches, you try and grasp...
We're just hearing the little red flag in the background there. They're sharing it there, just so our viewers can understand. Please carry on, Norman.
I mean, as a journalist, you want to kind of have a story to tell. I have to say I'm slightly struggling to understand what it was that Mr. Corbyn wanted to say. I certainly don't think there was a sort of message to the broader country. I mean, a lot of it was obviously very internally focused, and I suppose if there was a top line from it, it was that appeal for unity. Appealing, you know, the biggest cheer he got was that line appealing for an end to trench warfare, divided parties don't win elections. But a lot of it felt to me a bit of a comfort blanket for his party, going through policies which, you know, yes, his party absolutely loves, getting rid of zero-hours contracts, nationalising the railways, National Investment Bank, all that sort of stuff goes down very well with his party. But if unity was to be a central message, I think he needed to do more. And actually, there was a slight sort of element at the very beginning of his speech, and you picked it out, when he lauded those who had gone into the shadow cabinet. And he said very deliberately, they are the future. In other words, all you big Labour beasts from the past who've been giving me so much grief, forget it, you're not the future. Now, that is not a message to kind of bring people together. So, you know, it'll go down terrifically well. I thought performance-wise, actually, he has improved, because he can sometimes be a bit of a mumbler, a bit diffident. I thought he looked a lot more confident.
It was a much more improved performance on last year.
He's much
more confident, more vocal, more articulate.
He's much more relaxed as leader and sort of comfortable in his skin as leader. But if you are a voter sitting at home, I don't think you take much from, you know, some of the very Corbyn-esque lines about, you know, stopping arms sales to Saudi Arabia or peace in Colombia. I mean, I just don't think that really grabs people out there. And I'm not sure what his offer was to the electorate. So, you know, it'll make people feel good. Whether it actually gets any traction out with this conference chamber, I'm much less sure.
All right, and as we move from the red flag to Jerusalem that you may hear in the background, Rachel Shabby, what's your take on it?
I agree that it was a much more confident, capable performance. It was a leadership speech that we saw. We have seen a step change in the way Corbyn comes across, and I think this has really cemented that. But I think in terms of narrative arch, there definitely was one. What Corbyn was doing there, over an hour, was it?
It was an hour, just
carefully,
maybe a few seconds short.
It was very carefully and slowly and steadily building an arch whereby the Conservative government is old, it's out of touch, it's privileged, it's elite, it doesn't have the capability to tackle the very urgent needs of the country. So he set up the Tory party as being out of date, out of touch, ill-equipped, and constantly letting the country down. Meanwhile, all the while, building up a narrative of the Labour Party as being modern, forward-looking, progressive, wants to invest, wants to innovate. He spoke about a patriotism that comes from a Britain that innovates, that builds things, that designs things, that makes things. He spoke about investing in that. He drew people together, I think, within a sort of shared narrative that is, we can find solutions. We are struggling at the moment, but we can find solutions.
Okay.
And we do it by investing and innovating and looking forward. And that is all something, these are all things that the Conservative government does not know how to do.
That may be the game, or the aim, but does it work? Because Neil Kinnock tried to do that with the Tories in 1990. And when they changed leaders from Thatcher to Major, the public kind of thought it's like a new government. And in some ways, the polls suggest the public also think that with the demise of Mr. Cameron, his set, this is a new government too.
Yeah, I mean, I thought there was a narrative he could have grasped there, but I don't think he did. And he kind of touched on it lightly, which was this idea of we are in a new era, a different sort of politics. The old model is broken, which I think he genuinely believes, but it was kind of done in, you know, a paragraph. And I think you could build a story around that. This is a new era. I represent a different way of doing things. And I felt it got lost in almost what became a list of policy statements, which we already know. I mean, the new policies, I think I counted 2/3. One was this idea of allowing councils to borrow to build council housing. I mean, you know, absolutely fine, very worthy, but probably a bit technocratic and dull for most viewers. There was an announcement, I think, on a pupil premium, an arts pupil premium, which again sounded sort of slightly underpowered. So it didn't seem to me there was an offer to the British people in policy. And then if you're not going to do that, then I think you have to impart a vision. And I don't think he gave that vision. I think if he'd managed to grip this idea of we're in a different world, things are different, and I represent that, there was a potential to develop that story, but I didn't think he got there.
What was in it for the disillusioned PLP?
I mean, I think it was actually quite deliberate and quite clever of Corbyn. He didn't really attack. He didn't do any attacking. He didn't talk about unity much either, but he did try and unify the party along the lines of this common message, this common narrative, this new era, new solutions for a crisis. It's interesting that you mentioned housing. I mean, housing is, of course, one of the biggest issues. Most people will be feeling the effects of a housing crisis. Most people in the country will be feeling that. So actually, for him to signal that is a really big deal. But he did also signal lots of other policies, like investment in innovation. He talked about raising corporation tax specifically to pay for education. So he signaled the beginning of, or the return of education maintenance allowance, which is a really big deal.
We're trying to go over, so I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we've just got to move on. First of all, we've got to let Norman go, because he's got 53 other outlets to service between now and later this evening. Norman, thank you for being with us. We now want to find out, you've heard how the journalists, two of the journalists, felt about the speech, but how did it go down with the people who matter here in Liverpool, the party members? Well, Adam Fleming is with a few just outside the conference hall.
Hi Andrew, as usual, totally unplanned. We're diving into the crowd to see what people think. Hello there, you're live on the BBC. What did you think of the speech? What did you think of the speech?
Absolutely brilliant, inspiring. We're going to win the next election.
Left you with butterflies in the stomach?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Didn't it you?
No comment. So, what did you think of the speech?
Very good speech, very good speech.
What about you?
It was amazing.
What do you think the theme was? I mean, was there a message or a storyline that he was talking about?
I think it was a fairer society. You know, somebody who works in the NHS, we see the inequality, you know, we see the need for reinvestment, and he says the right things, and the people responded to that very positively, so keep the fingers crossed, yeah.
Thanks very much. Hello there, you're live on the BBC. What did you think of the speech?
I thought it was very good. It was very good, and it covered loads of things that everybody is really feeling passionate about, and I'm one of the many thousands who's come back to the Labour Party.
Okay, Madam, what did you think of the speech? Do you think he addressed some of the problems he had to address?
I think he's given us a very, very clear platform now to go out into our communities and fight for this country and equality.
Have we got any Owen Smith supporters who were won over by Jeremy today? Yeah.
I think Jeremy's going forward, and now we're addressing the concerns of the country and the party. So I think we can rebuild and build a Britain that we want to see.
Okay, right. Who was really inspired by the speech? You're live on the BBC.
Yes.
No,
not at all. Very disappointing.
What was the problem?
I think for me there was an awful lot of talking about what's problematic, what's wrong. And there was a lot of saying, great, let's change that, and why we should change that. But I'm still waiting to hear how we're going to change that. And I think there was an
opportunity. We're going to change it. He talked about the changes in to the companies that are going to make a contribution to improve education. He talked about that we're going to be more welcoming of people coming into this country. He talked about building more houses. He talked about a bank that is going to invest in this country. He's talking all the practical things. How can you say he's got everything except we're going to get out there, I hope you as well, and we're going to persuade people that what he's saying is absolutely right. It's about the needs of the many, not the few. It's not the Tories who are going to just interested in the few.
What are we going to do?
But I told
you very much. We'll let you carry on that discussion later on. Who thought Jeremy Corbyn's speaking styles improved? Do you think Jeremy Corbyn's speaking style has improved?
Yes, very good.
Right, and that's all from the delegates here on the conference floor, where you can buy a copy of Jeremy Corbyn's speech if you really want a keepsake. Back to you.
That was our Adam there. Not quite in the spirit of unity there. I mean, they're only walking out after 30 seconds. He's already got them arguing among themselves there, but it was interesting. Rachel, housing, you mentioned quite rightly. It's one of, I think, the undercovered but huge policy issues that faces. But I have covered manifestos going on from the Labour one in '97 through other Labour ones to the Tory one in 2010 and the Tory one again in 2015 too, all promising much more housing, and it hardly ever happens. They seem to run up against planning constraints, local council constraints and so on. I'm not quite sure if anybody yet knows how to break the logjam on this.
I mean, I do think that this is something that Jeremy Corbyn really believes in. I remember interviewing him a few months ago and asked him what the most important thing in terms of domestic policy was, and housing was number one. And rightly, because it does affect, we all know how big an impact it has had on our society.
And how short we are of
and
housing.
how short we are of housing stock. So I do think that there is a reason why this has become at the forefront of Labour Party policy.
I guess the issue is how do you deliver, because one of his problems if he gets into, but yeah, that's true, but he's got two problems in that. One is getting planning permissions because councils are reluctant to release land. Is he going to overrule them from Whitehall, which would fly in the face of a lot of the rhetoric here this week? And secondly, the biggest demand for houses tends to be in areas where there are Tory councils. And that's another thing he's got to overcome.
Yeah, but I think the most important thing to overcome is the lack of willing to do it. And that's what the Tory government and the coalition government before it demonstrated. There was no interest in replenishing certainly the social housing stock, and there was no interest in providing more housing. There was a complete lack of capacity to understand how much of a problem it was causing for people, both renting and not able to buy. So I think actually the biggest obstacle is the desire to do so.
Would you agree with him? Would you place what he's done to the Labour Party and the forces he represents in the Labour Party there with Syriza in Greece? Of course, they did it with a new party, and Podemos in Spain, another radical left movement, which has challenged the traditional Socialist Party. Was I right in thinking is what he was saying is that we've channeled their radicalism and reinvented the Labour Party rather than done it from outside?
Yes, he did talk about that. He also spoke about a sort of 21st century socialism. So he made it very clear that this isn't an old style. This isn't going backwards. This is very much a modern socialism for a modern society facing modern crisis. And those parties that you spoke about across Europe, Syriza, Podemos, came about because of the same sort of economic and social crises that we're seeing across Europe. In the UK, that has happened within an existing party, primarily, I think, because the party system cannot accommodate any other manifestation.
We've only got a couple of minutes to go, so I'm going to interrupt because Len McCluskey has joined us. Welcome, it's good to see you. We've not got much time, so which speech did you prefer, Tom Watson's or Jeremy Corbyn's?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's. Tom's speech was about yesteryear's politics. I think what we've seen today was a leader, somebody who spelt out a vision, and a vision that is desperately needed in our country, and that call for unity and what Labour can achieve when we are together, I thought was very powerful and very inspiring.
Where did your attack on Tom Watson's speech, though, fit into the call for unity?
What attack? A critique, an opinion that says I thought Tom was going back.
He said he was confused.
I thought that it was going back.
Labour Party.
That it was going back to the third way of Blairism. That was for a different era, and I said that really is not a vision anymore. So of course it is about, Jeremy's asked us to wipe the slate clean and to perhaps unite. Perhaps I need to be careful about my rhetoric as well, Andrew.
Well, don't we all at times? Let me ask you this. Do you think that the Parliamentary Labour Party needs to change to reflect more the kind of Labour Party that Mr Corbyn was outlining in his speech today?
I think that's a great question, and the answer to that is yes. When you are a representative of a party, you have to understand if the party is changing, and I'm sure that the vast majority of the PLP will recognise that the party has changed, that there is a vision and a commitment there, and I think they'll come back to support the leader and effectively support the membership that put them there.
We almost have to go, but you're up for re-election quite soon, aren't you? Are you running again?
Oh, a long time, yes, a long time.
Are you going to run again?
I'll let you know when I decide.
Oh, go on, let us know now. We need a story.
No. My members and my executive will know first, Andrew.
I think you're going to. Should he run again?
I think that's between him and his conscience.
Quite right.
His conscience?
And the
between
members.
him and his members.
And those as well.
All right. Len McCluskey, I'm sorry we're so rushed, but
okay.
it was good to see. You should have cut down the speech a little bit and we'd have had more time to talk. Come back and see us
Will do. Always a
other
pleasure,
time.
Andrew.
So that's it from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. It finishes with Mr Corbyn's speech calling for a socialism suited to the 21st century. Joe will be back with more Daily Politics tomorrow at midday here on BBC 2, and I'll be back on BBC 1 tomorrow night after question time, when I have no idea who our guest will be, but by maybe Mr Portillo will finally have got off his train. Off, not his trolley. Bye-bye.